All right. Well, Eric's setting up. I'll start talking. Okay. Well, welcome everyone to our panel. I'm hoping internet works. It does. Cool. I'm Jesse Paul, one of the politics reporters here at the Colorado Sun. Thank you for coming to our panel on polling, which is the best part of politics in my mind. It's super interesting, and it tells you. I am as a reporter. I hate having to go stand outside ballot boxes and ask people like, "Hey, tell me your most intimate information." In part because I think it is so unreliable in terms of what you're getting back, right? Because depends on what time you go. In Colorado, a very small fraction of people actually vote in person, so you're getting kind of a skewed sample. So polling comes into is a super handy tool in terms of actually gauging public opinion in a way that's has some efficacy. So I'm Jesse Paul. Next to me is Brian Eason, a fellow political reporter here at the Colorado Sun. We've got Professor Seth Masket, who's the director of the Center on American Politics at the University of Denver. Seth, thank you, and do you so much for hosting us. We value our partnership with you guys so much. Who's a Colorado Sun member in here? Okay, who gets the unaffiliated newsletter? Okay, if you should get the unaffiliated newsletter. If you are in this session, you really should get the unaffiliated newsletter. So in the front, they can help you sign up for that. It's a twice a week newsletter that Brian and I do where we kind of pull back the curtain on politics and policy. So stuff that's going on in the legislature, polling data, nerdy political stuff that kind of helps you find out what everyone's talking about in the congressional delegation and in the governor's office and at the Capitol. So I want to introduce our panelists. We've got Kevin Ingham, the principal and founder of Aspect Strategic, a Democratic polling firm here in Colorado. He's joined by Kathryn Hahne, a director at New Bridge Strategy, a Republican polling and political firm here in Colorado. And they are part of the Colorado Polling Institute, which is a nonpartisan, nonprofit endeavor here in Colorado that's kind of helped fill the gap where journalists have, news organizations used to do polling, but it's expensive and we don't have the money to do it anymore. So they've been super helpful in helping kind of help us understand what the public conversation is and how people are feeling. I'll note to kick things off that the Colorado Polling Institute is a Colorado Sun sponsor and a sponsor of SunFest, but none of our sponsors or financial donors have any say over editorial direction. So we just like to be transparent about that. So we thought it'd be interesting to kick it off with a little presentation from Kevin and Kathryn to kind of talk about some of the polling data they have and help set up our conversation. So I'll toss it to you guys.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for being here with us today. Thank you to SunFest for having both me and Kevin, as well as the Colorado Polling Institute here. We are thrilled to be able to share with you some of our more recent polling data on what Coloradans are thinking about and about the 2024 election. There's my slide guy. Hi, slide guy. Thank you. The Colorado Polling Institute is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization that is dedicated to providing this type of public opinion research to not only stakeholders of the Capitol, but across the state as well, and to regular folks just like you and me. I encourage you to visit the website. We have all of the top line data and cross-tabulated data from our surveys available for anyone to access. And as a little tease, you heard it here first, folks. We have a November survey. Our data will be coming out sometime in November, and we'll be in the field around the election. So we are hard at work at that questionnaire now, and I'd encourage you to go check it out, sign up for our mailing list, and see what we have in store for November. So Kevin and I are here today purely from sort of an explanatory standpoint. I left my crystal ball at home. I know Kevin did as well too, because we called this morning and talked about it. So we will not be making any predictions about the election here today. We're just hoping to provide you with some data and some really interesting viewpoints from Colorado voters across the state. We conducted a survey in March among 632 voters throughout the state. They were all likely to vote in the 2024 election. We set quotas and we did weighting to ensure that this audience was representative of a 2024 electorate. let's see, what else can I tell you about that? I think that's it. So most of the data you'll see in our presentation today will be from March if you want to go on the website and access the crosstabs. We also have a few data points from the November survey and some national points as well, but we'll be sure to call that out whenever we show something that's not March. Okay, in March, we talked to voters about a wide variety of topics, including the migrant crisis in Colorado, the 2024 election, and some ballot measures, how they felt about past ballot measures. We also asked about their views about Colorado and about being a Coloradan. And I love starting out this question, love starting out on a positive note. A vast majority of voters in Colorado are proud to be a Coloradan. In fact, 4 in 5, over 84%, say that they strongly agree with the statement they're proud to be a Coloradan. And we have a majority saying that they strongly agree. And in this case, this data makes my pollster heart very happy because everyone said this. All of our major key subgroups told us they were proud to be a Coloradan. So voters from every age group, every gender, party affiliation as well, whether they were Republican or a Democrat, they felt like they were proud to be a Coloradan. However, voters don't exactly agree about the direction of the state. So we had 47%, I can't really see the numbers, but 47% say that the state was headed in the right direction, and just as many saying that it's headed in the wrong direction. This data is fairly consistent with what we saw in November of last year among the same exact slice of the electorate, likely 2024 voters. So some consistency here. And we're definitely doing a lot better than we are nationally when pollsters ask this question. I think recently, earlier this week, NBC News put out the public results of this question, and 73% of Americans said that the country is off on the wrong track. So really, Coloradans are split, but we're doing quite well compared to national data. And even though we're a touch more negative, really, I think we're only seeing strong negativity. Those saying definitely we're headed on the wrong track from our voters who are a little bit older. They tend to live on the Eastern Plains, and they tend to have less than a high school education. So it's this very, very sort of unique subset of the electorate that's saying that we're definitely off on the wrong track. In terms of issues that voters care about, Kevin, I think, can speak to this as well. We hear about 3 things from voters. We hear about immigration, we hear about homelessness, and we hear about the cost of living here. So in our survey, we allowed voters to tell us in their own words what the main issue was they wanted the state legislature to address this year. And 14% of those mentions said something about immigration. At the time, we were sort of embroiled in, and we still are, in the migrant crisis. So it's really no surprise that that rose to the top here. We had 12% have some sort of mention about homelessness. And then if you combine that last category, the housing affordability category, with some of those other categories listed on the right, taxes, cost of living, the economy and jobs, we had 1 in 3 mention some sort of pocketbook issue. And really, oh, that is very small. And really, oh, it is very small still. Our formatting, I guess, didn't work out. I'm sorry, y'all. We had 2 in 3 telling us that the economy is not working in terms of being able to provide a good standard of living for Coloradans. And what I think is most surprising about this data is that this crosses partisan lines. So Republicans, Independents, and Democrats all agree on this fact. 53% of Republicans agree that a good standard of living is unattainable in Colorado, even if you work hard and play by the rules, as do 56% of Democrats. So again, a really sort of stunning partisan alignment here when we're not usually used to seeing a lot of partisan alignment. And those 1 in 3 saying that the economy is working and that it provides a way for Coloradans to work hard and play by the rules and earn a good standard of living. Those tend to be our more established Coloradans. So people who have been here for longer periods of time. They also tend to be higher income, as well as our older voters. In fact, The concern about cost of living here is so acute that over a majority told us they are seriously considering moving either to a different state, to a different part of the state, or a different community because of their concerns about cost of living. So you can see that breakdown up top right there. 38% said that they have considered moving out of Colorado, and 13% saying that they've thought about moving to a different community or area in the state. These voters telling us this tend to be younger voters, so ages 18 to 34. They tend to be renters. They tend to be voters of color, and they're more likely to be conservative. And most startling, I think, is 1 in 10 told us they've already moved, not outside of Colorado, of course, because we only talk to Colorado voters, but they've already moved to a different part of the state or a different community because of cost of living concerns. So that is a very quick and broad brush stroke of what we are seeing in the Colorado political landscape today. And I'll hand it off to Kevin to talk about the 2024 election and how ballot measures are perceived in Colorado.
Awesome. Thanks, Kathryn. So Kathryn gave us a 30,000-foot view of how the Colorado mindset heading into this election. Now we're going to look at what they are thinking about when it comes to the 2024 election and their expectations for it. We'll start with expectations. And you don't need to be a DU poli-sci professor to know that the politics in Colorado have changed dramatically over the last 15 years. And voters have noticed this as well. So in 2008, the Rocky Mountain News and News 4 conducted a survey where they asked voters, is Colorado a red state, a blue state, or somewhere in between? And back then, 60% thought that we had a more purple hue than a red or a blue one. But the times have changed. This year, we asked voters that exact same question, and only a third told us that they think that Colorado is a purple state. In fact, over 60% now believe that we are a blue state. And nobody seems to have noticed this more than Republicans, because 3/4 of Republicans in the survey told us that Colorado is now a blue state, compared to 2/3 of Democrats and 55% of unaffiliated voters. Now, despite Coloradans' expectations about how the state is going to vote, there might be some Republicans out there that actually feel encouraged that there's some optimism that they might be able to notch some wins here in Colorado down ballot. And that's because Coloradans know who is in charge and they are grumpy. You can go ahead and go to the next slide. So we asked that age-old question. Are you better off than you were 4 years ago? Are you worse off, or have things not changed for you? And a majority of voters told us that they are worse off today than they were 4 years ago. Now, usually, when voters have that on their minds when they're going into the ballot box, or here in Colorado when they're opening up their mail ballot, that usually bodes very poorly for the incumbent party. But in some ways, we are living in ahistorical times. Now, we have not asked the presidential race here in Colorado since there has been the shakeup at the top of the ticket. But twice over the last year, we have asked voters about the Biden and Trump matchup. In November of 2023, a little less than a year ago, Biden was leading Trump by 9 points. We asked this again in a statewide survey in March, and Biden was leading Trump by 10 points. Now, if that had been the outcome, it would simultaneously be, yes, a smaller margin than what we saw Biden win by in Colorado in 2020, but it also would have been a landslide. And these are the exact same voters that tell us that they are doing worse today than they were at the beginning of Joe Biden's term. Now, if that leaves you scratching your head, I have 2 data points that might help make sense of this. First, when we asked voters, do you think the Make America Great Again movement will move Colorado in the right direction? Is it misguided but not dangerous, or is it dangerous for Colorado? A majority, including 56% of unaffiliated voters, said that the MAGA movement is dangerous for Colorado. Second data point is that when we looked at those voters who told us that they were going to vote for Biden in March, we said, are you voting for Joe Biden, or are you voting against Donald Trump? Over 60% of them said that they were voting against Donald Trump. So this gives us a little bit of a worldview, or a peek into the worldview of the Colorado voter. They are grumpy, they are struggling, and they think that If they're voting for change and that change is MAGA, the cure might be worse than the disease. Now, we all know, you can go ahead and go to the next slide. I'm curious to see how that works. Oh, actually, that one's the best. Okay, all right. Sorry, we should have sent this as a PDF, so the formatting blew up on us. But we all know, right, that this is not going to be a matchup between Donald Trump and Joe Biden. It is going to be a matchup between Kamala Harris and Joe Biden. No, it's not. Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. Appreciate you letting me get in there. Yeah. And we unfortunately have not had a chance to ask voters about this. But we can make some educated guesses about what it might mean for Colorado by looking at what has happened in the national polling since we were last in the field. Now, when we were in the field in March, Joe Biden was leading by double digits, but in the national polling, Joe Biden was actually behind Donald Trump. Now, since then, we have seen a reversal of fortunes, where now Kamala Harris leads by an average of 2 points in national polling over Donald Trump. Now, there's every reason to believe that that improvement in fortunes for the Democratic ticket that we've seen nationally, we're also going to see trickle down here into Colorado. And that's because the groups that Kamala Harris is doing better with than Joe Biden are the same groups that we saw Joe Biden struggling with in our polling. People of color and young people. So our presidential race is not going to be competitive here in Colorado. I think we all know that. Voters certainly know that. But we do have some competitive congressional and state legislative races. I think that this all gives us a little bit of a worldview into what they're thinking about. They're kind of upset. They're struggling. But while that would normally sort of tempt them to vote for change, change might not look so good in the form that it's being offered. And while Democrats were previously considering sitting out the race, now we see Democrat enthusiasm increasing now that Kamala Harris is at the top of the ticket. And those voters who are considering voting for change have to wrestle with, are they want more of the same, or do they want to change to a political movement that they may not feel comfortable with? So we don't just vote on candidates here in Colorado, we also vote on ballot measures. And this year we are going to vote on a lot of ballot measures. There are 14 statewide ballot measures. That does not count the local ballot measures. For a Denver voter, you have 26 ballot measures to vote on this year between the state and local. That's on top of your candidates, your judges. Good luck to you. Now, given all of this, we thought it would be interesting to ask voters, do you like voting on all this? Do you like voting on so many different ballot issue questions? Turns out they do. When we asked them, do you like voting on many different ballot issue questions or you dislike it, 88% told us they liked it, 12% said that they disliked it. Now, two caveats. First one being that only 38% told us that they like it a lot. The rest said they like it most of the time. The second thing is we asked them this in March, before they had been delivered their very hefty ballots by forklift. So it'll be interesting to see whether voters' opinions change about this. And we're planning to track this in the survey that Kathryn mentioned. After voters have gone through their ballots, do they still like it as much as they did back in March? Now, we're not in the prediction business at CPI, but we thought it would be interesting and informative to see how voters felt about previous ballot measures that voters have passed here in Colorado. That looks terrible. It's okay. I'll do it off memory. So when we asked voters about a bunch of ballot measures that had passed, we said, look, do you think this has been more of a good thing for Colorado, a bad thing for Colorado, or is it too early to tell? And I think it actually gives a good window into the Colorado mindset that the two most popular ballot measures were Tabor and marijuana legalization. In both cases, 2/3 of voters said that this had been more of a good thing than a bad thing for the state. Now, we asked about things like paid family leave, legalizing sports betting, and wine in grocery stores. And in each case, voters told us, a majority told us, that they thought that it had been more of a good thing than a bad thing for Colorado. The one exception was a reintroduction of wolves in Colorado. In that case, 34% told us that they thought that it had been a good thing for Colorado, 27% a bad thing, and 27% said it had been a bad thing. But that left a plurality saying that it's too early to tell. what I take away from this is that Colorado voters, a little bit of fiscal conservatism, a little bit of social liberalism, and they give themselves a pat on the back for the policies that they have passed so far, with the exception of wolves, for which they think that the jury is still out. All right, so hopefully this gave you guys an interesting and informative peek into the mindset of the Colorado voter heading into the election. Hand it over to Jesse to bring us home.
Can we go back to the presidential slide? I have a question for you guys. So I like polling is such a science, and I think that's kind of a fascinating thing. And it's my former colleague John Frank taught me a lot about how to kind of interpret this stuff. So I have a question for you guys that I think is just kind of a cool show of how this works. So Keating Research, another Colorado pollster that we have a lot of confidence in, polled recently the presidential race in Colorado, had Harris leading Trump 53 to 42%, which sounds like a lot different than this, but the margin was 3%. So I guess my question is just like that tracks with the modeling that you guys have, which is not actually based off of talking to voters. You're able to kind of show that. Am I interpreting that correct?
Could I ask you to restate the question?
Sure.
Way?
Okay. So Keating did a poll. They found that Harris was leading Trump 53-42. The poll had a 3% margin of error, which I just think is interesting because it's tracks with what you guys have here, even though this isn't based off actually talking to voters. It's that you guys were able to make a scientific guess of kind of where Colorado voters stand.
That is actually the national polling average.
Oh,
what
okay.
you see up there is
Okay.
not we're not trying to model what's going to happen in Colorado.
Okay.
So
just forget everything I said.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Well, let's go. That
I
is
would
what the
actually- I
polling
would actually
shows.
go to the previous slide, actually. So there's where Biden and Trump were.
Okay.
So 49 to 53. That's actual Colorado data.
Right. Okay.
So I think that is maybe what you were getting at a little bit.
That's
That's what Kevin was trying to
Yeah.
say. Yeah.
I mean, she's doing much better.
She
according to
is.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay. So I wanted to ask you guys some questions. We're going to talk a little bit about a lot of things in this panel, but first I wanted to talk about just how the vibes are bad among Colorado voters, right? That's kind of the way I would put it. I wonder how you advise your clients when you have numbers like that. Like, what does that translate to in terms of a campaign, A, and B, as like a reporter and member of the public, how am I to interpret that information? Like, if Coloradans are feeling just as good about the direction as they are bad, like what can you kind of infer from that?
Previous surveys was that the voters who tell us that the state is heading in the wrong direction, their top issue is cost of living. And we do surveys in Denver as well. And just so you guys know, when we ask Denver voters, are things in the right direction or the wrong track here in Denver, it's also evenly divided. And we look at a whole bunch of different crosstabs, right? We look by political party, by gender, by age, what have you. But one thing that we've always really found interesting is looking at how long you've lived in Colorado. If you look at those voters that are new to Colorado, say within the last 5 years, they love Colorado. They think it's great here, right? Because compared to where they came from, it is great here. But then if you look at the voters who have been here 20 years or longer or are natives, they've seen their state change a lot. In fact, when we asked voters whether they agree or disagree with the statement, Colorado has changed so much I sometimes feel like a stranger in my own state, 58% say that they agree with that statement. So there is a lot of divides that are happening underneath the surface, but a lot of what is happening here is a reaction to change. In fact, if you talk to a voter in Denver that's been here for a long time, they'll say, it's always been a big city, but now we have big city problems. And that feels different than where it was before. So you're asking, how do I advise a client? Well, I think it depends. Are you the incumbent or are you the challenger? Because if you are the incumbent, you have to recognize that. You have to recognize that people are feeling financially pressured, that they feel like they can't get ahead even if they work hard and play by the rules. And you have to acknowledge that you are in office and that there's more work to do. You can't just take a victory lap. If you're the challenger, well, you just hang all of the problems around the neck of the person who is currently in office.
For Kathryn on this. So, like, I remember all these polls came out where everyone was like, I feel terrible about Colorado ahead of the 22 election. The Republicans were like, we got this. We're going to win. And that did not go well. So, like, should there be an inference made, I guess, between those feelings and like shaking up the status quo, or is it more complicated than that?
I think Republicans in particular, Kevin mentioned that question about I feel like a stranger in my own state. Republicans overwhelmingly, 85% say they feel like they're a stranger in their own state. They also feel as though we did some other polling, the Colorado Pulse poll for the Health Foundation, and Republicans are also more likely to feel as though their politics, their political views contribute to a sense of not feeling as though they belong in the state. So I certainly feel, I can certainly say and point to data that, there is a sense among Republicans that things are different. We saw the data about Colorado's changing status from a purple state to a blue state. And I think, that's certainly present. But, the folks who are moving here are identifying as independent, and it's not really helping out Republicans at all.
I'm going to put you guys on the spot a little bit and see how well you remember some stuff from your March poll. I thought the finding about how much people like voting on ballot initiatives was kind of interesting. Did anything jump out at y'all from that finding? Like, was it pretty consistent across Republicans, Democrats, unaffiliated, or were there any like trends that jumped out at you of like different people maybe felt differently on that question?
I mean, when you have 88% of any population telling you the same thing, there's really not going to be that many interesting things happening under the surface. And in this case, it was true as well. Everybody said that they really liked voting on, well, they didn't say they really liked, but they said that they liked more than disliked voting on these measures. And I don't think it's actually all that unintuitive why it is that voters would think that. Right now, CPI has done a lot of work on faith in democracy, faith in institutions, and it's quite low. And trust in politicians is even lower than it is when it comes to even lower than it is for institutions. So what ballot measures give voters a chance to do is to exercise some direct control over the direction of their state. So regardless of whether you are a Democrat, a Republican, unaffiliated, young, old, rural, urban, whatever, you like having that sense of control. You may not always feel like you're the best educated on what it is that you're voting on, but the fact that you actually have that option to exercise that control, it makes sense why you see such broad agreement across the entire political spectrum, because distrust and dissatisfaction is not necessarily only come in shades of red, blue, or purple.
Another response and really a question I thought that was interesting out of your March poll that hadn't really seen anyone frame this way. There was this question where voters were asked to choose, okay, we know we want more affordable housing, all of that's, we don't like the cost of living, but they're asked to choose, okay, you can either create more affordable housing or you can cut property taxes, make my house cheaper, right? Voters were split pretty equally. It was like 54%, a majority were for creating affordable housing, 46% said cut my property taxes. But I think that was a really interesting question because it really framed all of the, like a big chunk of the debate that we keep having at the state house, at the local level. But I would argue that state lawmakers, just in terms of the raw dollar amounts, I mean, they have definitely put more resources into cutting property taxes than they have in actually creating more affordable housing. So I wonder if y'all had any insights on why that might be. Like, is there anything from the data that suggests that, property taxes are more salient among certain constituencies than others? Like, I guess, do you have any insights as to like why property taxes have become such a potent political issue here?
Well, voters feel like their property taxes are high. They feel like they've gone up. They see their assessments and those documents come in the mail and they can look and see how much those have gone up over time. So they see that and they feel that on the property tax end. Of course, Republicans are way more interested in taxes. So it's that voting bloc that is probably driving that property tax 46% you mentioned. However, I think, the housing issue is a little bit more complicated, and a little bit more difficult to address. We've done a ton of work on housing here, and it's people don't really know what affordable housing is, or what that word means, or how to solve the problem. So I think they want to see housing fixed, but they don't really know what that looks like, or know what that solution really is. So I think property taxes are sort of an easy thing that people can grab onto. And when they say they want that fixed, it's because they see it in their mailbox.
Was that pretty polarized by party? Was it mostly Republicans saying property taxes and Democrats saying affordable housing?
I don't remember the exact numbers on that, but I would guess that it was politically polarized. Yes.
There was some really interesting socioeconomic data on that question. So, for example, the only voters where more were saying that they wanted property tax cuts rather than building more affordable housing was high-income Coloradans, those who are making over 100K household income per year. If you look at voters who are renters, it was like 3/4, of course, as you might expect, said that they wanted to see their build more affordable housing. But when it came to homeowners, I was actually surprised that they were close to 50-50 on this question, which is why ultimately there's far more homeowners than there are renters. But the fact that they were pretty evenly divided on that question, and the fact that renters are so overwhelmingly on that question, I think it's just interesting to see that even homeowners who can benefit from tax cuts recognize that there is a wider problem here on housing affordability, and they want to see more housing built. So yeah, the socioeconomics were an interesting sort of under the surface that we saw in that question, as was the sort of counterintuitive splits that we saw on homeowners on that question.
I'll just add one more data point, if you don't mind. We also have asked a question recently about how worried people are that they'll be able to afford to live in Colorado in the future, and whether their children will be able to afford to live in Colorado in the future. And those numbers are off the charts.
Thank you so much for a great presentation, really good discussion here. I was hoping to press you for a little more detail on, I think, Kevin, what you called the grumpiness factor. I was particularly fascinated by what you had on that question about, are you asking people, are they better off now than they were 4 years ago? We know, empirically, there's a lot of ways in which the economy is a little better now, some ways in which it's worse, but also importantly, we're all here in a room and not hiding in our homes, terrified of killing our neighbors or our loved ones. There was, I think, a New York Times poll earlier this year where they were asking people a lot of open-ended questions. What do you remember about 4 years ago? And surprisingly, it wasn't all that negative. People were saying, oh, I had more free time. I was spending time with my kids. I baked sourdough. I had a little extra money from the government. It was surprisingly, that's not bad. So I'm sort of curious, how you interpret this question. Is it, are people just really uncomfortable with where things are now? Do they have surprisingly rosy feelings about where things were 4 years ago? What's motivating that?
I think it's most of it comes down to pocketbook stuff. I think that there is a understanding that if you want a job, there are jobs available, but that the cost of everything has gone up so dramatically that it is very hard to feel as though, even if you were holed up in your house baking sourdough, things were more affordable back then than they were today. And that question of affordability is really, it comes up in literally every single CPI survey that we do. And one of the places in particular where it seems to concentrate is on housing. We just keep on coming back to this, but that's because that's the direction that voters always end up pointing us. We asked the question in November of last year. We asked, if you think about the future of Colorado, are these things going to get better or worse? We asked questions like, is it going to be better or worse to start a business? Is it going to be better or worse to raise a family? Is it going to be better or worse place to buy a home? And in every single one of those cases, a majority said it will get better or stay about the same, except for when it came to Colorado being a good place to buy a home. 63% told us that Colorado is going to become a worse place to buy a home. And I think that is particularly when you talk to younger voters, because that's when you look at that question and you ask like young people in particular, they are like among the most pissed off because things are so expensive, and it's particularly housing that is a problem for them. They cannot imagine themselves being able to afford a home, certainly in Colorado, but looking around everywhere, everything is really expensive. So when we ask them a very plain question, are you better off today than you were 4 years ago? And they think back, could I buy more with my money 4 years ago than I could today? The answer is yes. So the answer therefore is, yeah, things are worse for me than they were 4 years ago.
Relatedly, you were talking about the kind of disparity where a lot of Coloradans think things are on the wrong track. A lot of people think they're worse off, but people are also terrified of the MAGA movement and see that as, I can't remember the term. Was it a threat or a danger was the term? Dangerous. Is the suggestion there that, if it were not for Trump and his movement, that Republicans might be in position either to do a lot better or to even win this state? I mean, that's a lot of speculation, but
So let's think back to not that long ago. Colorado used to be a lot more competitive, right? Whether that was at the state legislative level, the statewide constitutional office. We had a Republican U.S. senator not that long ago. It used to be a lot more competitive. What has happened in this country generally that has been sort of magnified in Colorado is that there has been sort of a switch in what we are polarized on. We're now very polarized by educational attainment, and this is one of the most educated states in the country. And the thing that caused that polarization was Trump and MAGA. Now, we asked that same question about move us in the right direction, misguided but not dangerous, or dangerous, about just the Republican Party. It's like 20 points less likely to say that the Republican Party is dangerous. Now, they were more likely to say that the Democratic Party will move us in the right direction, as there are more Democrats here. However, the fact is the delta between the MAGA movement and the Republican Party is notable, and the fact that Colorado has moved so far blue, despite the fact that we are so angry about everything, is a reflection of that polarization that we have seen. The fact that we are just sort of a higher educated, more urbanized state means that elections have become a little bit easier for Democrats to win here, even when the environment otherwise looks quite bad for them, to the point that you were making earlier about the 2022 elections. We were freaking out about that on my side of the aisle. But we sort of learned through that transference of the sort of MAGA brand to the Republican Party has a staying power as long as Trump is still there in the background. What that means for the future, if he's not there or if the Republican Party moves in a different direction, I don't know exactly what that means for Colorado. I don't know whether that education polarization necessarily holds true moving forward, but it has been a driving force in why Colorado has moved from purple to blue.
Thank you. Fascinating. Okay, I'm going to ask one more general question. I want to pitch this to Kathryn. Basically, we get a lot of polling information these days. We see it written up in the newspapers. A new poll comes out immediately. There's some people trashing it and saying, well, they didn't poll these folks. Can you give us an idea, just sort of generally speaking, what should we be looking for? Like, what makes for a good poll? What's a red flag that should warn us it's not representative? What some tips for those of us who like to follow this?
Yeah, sure. That's a great question. So for statewide polling, we normally look for a sample size of at least 500 to 600. I would look to see how the survey was conducted in terms of whether it was conducted online, via text to web, whether on the phones. Of course, phones used to be the gold standard. And now we're doing more mixed mode. So if you see something that's like online and phone, that's very legitimate. We do that at CPI. I would look for, any type of question wording that maybe seems a little loaded to you. You'll know what I mean when you read it. It's like, do you like dogs? Yes, I like dogs. No, I like to kill puppies. Like, it's not, it's not that hard. It's pretty clear, which way some questions are leaning. Always look at the source as well. Of course, a Fox News poll is going to have, a little bit of a slant versus a CNN poll. So just know where the data is coming from. Look at the methodology. Take a look at the margin of error. Look at the audience interviewed as well. So in this case, we were reporting on 2024 the 2024 election. So we spoke to likely 2024 voters. And I think that pretty much sums it up. Did I miss anything?
One of the things that I'll just make a plug for here. And the reason I keep looking back there is because our fearless leader at CPI, David Carlson, is right back there. David, when he started CPI, insisted on transparency. Said, we want to release all of it. We don't want to, we have nothing to hide here. And so Kathryn made reference earlier that all of our questions, the exact way that we ask them in the order that we ask them, are posted on our websites. We also release the full crosstab so that you guys can go through and see for yourselves. I'm not saying that if a pollster is transparent, that it means that it is a good poll, or that if you're not getting all the information is a bad poll, but it is one more thing that you should sort of put into your mind when you're thinking about this. Are they being transparent? Will they answer the questions about the way that they're doing this? And can I go and look at it for myself, or am I sort of getting it through a keyhole where I can only see a little bit of what is being presented to me?
So I guess along those lines, as a journalist, something that I struggle with sometimes is, if I look at a poll, and it's recent, the survey size seems good, the pollster has like a relatively good reputation, but the numbers are crazy. So for example, to use a anonymous situation, a certain Republican congresswoman from Colorado who's running in a district that's 27 points Republican, and one of the Democratic candidates says, hey, I'm winning by 10 points in this poll. That, to me, that's where I struggle, and I wonder how you would recommend me and the public would interpret that. That doesn't seem plausible, but it checks the boxes on all those other things. So how do you recommend kind of digging into that data?
Yeah. So as a pollster, the first thing I would do is look at the demographics. I would look to see how they weighted the data, make sure that party affiliation is correct, and according to what we're seeing in the state. It is? Okay, good. So as a pollster, that's the first thing I would do. As a regular citizen, I think you just have to keep your wits about you, and you have to be smart. And it's really buyer's choice, right? I talk to people all the time who tell me about these crazy poll results, and I'm like, well, let's go through the methodology. Let's look at the demographics. You do have to be really careful. I don't think that that's rare, to be honest with you. There are a lot of pollsters out there. Not all of them are as good as Kevin is.
Here's kind of an interesting polling story, just from like a journalist perspective, just for transparency's sake. So 2022 election, Adam Frisch's campaign releases a poll conducted by his pollster internally, done by Keating Research, and presents it to a bunch of journalists. And we're sitting there, and it says Adam Frisch is down by 2 percentage points to Lauren Boebert in the 3rd congressional district. And Keating, Chris Keating, people know him. We respect him. We know about it. This press conference was like at a battle zone, right? I mean, all of us were like, there is no way that this is happening in the 3rd congressional district. And Chris was like, look, I stake my reputation on this. I believe in these numbers. And lo and behold, right, it comes out to be closer than 2 percentage points. So it's kind of an interesting, I guess with the margin of error, right, it could have been that he was down 4 or up 2, but it was like a interesting learning moment for me about how to kind of interpret polling data. I don't know if there's any comment you guys want to have to that, but it was a humbling moment.
I probably shouldn't say this, especially into a microphone when it's being recorded, but I try to tell all my clients that we need to have a very realistic view about what polling is and what it is not. Our response rates these days, guys, is like 1 to 3%. For every 100 people we call, 1, maybe 2 of them will participate in our survey. It is very hard for us, even when we're trying to make it as representative as possible, for us to represent this as a laser-guided missile, because it is not. Yes, there is a margin of error, but there is also undoubtedly some non-response bias, which just means people who are not taking polls are in some ways different that is important from people who do take polls. And I want to be very real about that. But that said, to the situations that you just provided, I still think that they can provide very useful information. I think that they provide very useful information for clients who keep their polls internal, because I tell them we should care a lot less about whether we're up 2 or down 2. We should use a poll to figure out how to make sure that we win by 2 rather than lose by 2. That is a good use of polling rather than trying to say, are we up 2 or down 2? The margin of error doesn't matter. But also in situations where you have a reputable poll that is showing something surprising, even if it's, is it actually going to be a 2-point race? Is it going to be a 1-point race? Is he actually going to beat Lauren Boebert? We don't know, but you can, as a reporter, say, this is an interesting finding because it is counterintuitive, but the polling is seen to point to maybe Adam Frisch has something going on underneath the surface that you wouldn't see unless you were actually asking voters directly. And that's the way that I would also look at that Congressional District 4 poll, just to call out the district that you're actually talking about, is, well, maybe they're not actually up 10. That would be the story of 2024. But it is interesting because we know that she moved in district. We know that she is unpopular. CPI polling has her unfavorables statewide at over 60%, including a significant number of Republicans. And all of that seems to make it some sense that maybe a Democrat would be more competitive here than they would otherwise. Are they up by 10? I doubt it, but it might still point to an interesting finding that maybe there's something going on here that makes it worth paying attention to. I don't envy your job, but that's the way that I try and tell clients to think about this stuff. Is we need to look at the direction that it's pointing and what it does to our sort of the common wisdom. If the poll is reputable, if it's checking all those boxes that Kathryn went through, then maybe even if it's not precisely right, it might be directionally right, and therefore something that's worth covering and talking about.
Thank you for validating the way I covered that Keating poll 2 years ago, by the way, which was to say, here are the numbers. It doesn't really look right there. Yeah, I mean, you guys aren't going to make polling predictions, but I think, among the Republicans that I talk to, it's generally accepted that, Ken Buck wins the 4th congressional district repeatedly by 20, 23 points. They don't think Boebert's going to win it by that much. Maybe it gets cut in half, which is a significant decrease, but that doesn't mean she's going to win by 10. Tricia Cavalrese is going to win by 10 points. Brian asked for the microphone. So.
One other
Thanks,
quick point. Sorry, I just want to make about polling as an industry. I mentioned we didn't bring our crystal balls with us today. Polling is also a snapshot in time. So it is not a poll that we conduct in September is not going to be predictive of what happens in November. There is so much time. There's so many things that could happen between September and November. I just would encourage people to remember that polling is not meant to be a crystal ball. It's meant to be, as Kevin mentioned, about directionality and about trends and about changes over time.
I wonder if you could talk a little bit more from the campaign side, right? Like you mentioned, the goal is not figure out that we're up 2 or down 2. It's how do we win by 2. So what are kind of the lessons you're taking on the campaign side of okay, we're weak here, we're strong here. How do you folks apply that to actual strategy?
So I used to go here to DU, and Seth was actually one of my professors. And a formative moment for me in my college years here at DU was watching The West Wing. And there was this thing that stuck with me all of these many years, which there's a scene where Josh Lyman, who's running the campaign, says, campaigns are not about the answer, they're about the question. And what he means by that is that there are certain issues where Republicans are just more trusted than Democrats are. It's just the way it is, right? If we ask in Colorado, if we ask nationally, what do you think the party that's going to do a better job on immigration is? What is the party that's going to do a better job on crime? We sort of know which way that's going to go. And if you ask about abortion, and if you ask about protecting democracy, and you ask about healthcare, Democrats tend to be better off there. So when we're doing polling, we're trying to inform a campaign, what we're really trying to do is think about what is the question. What do we want voters thinking about when they're voting? Because if they're thinking about crime, and if they're thinking about immigration, and they're thinking about inflation, that's bad for us. But if they're thinking about MAGA, and they're thinking about abortion, and they're thinking about healthcare, that's good for us. The poll provides us a strategic roadmap about how to frame the question and how to make sure that we can navigate those things that we'd rather not be talking about, while also making sure that we can run a campaign that is focused on the things that are better for us. I have this analogy that sort of metaphor that I've been making for the presidential race, where it's, for Kamala Harris, this is a game of keep it up, which it's that game that we all played when we were a kid, where you have a balloon and you're trying to keep it and don't let it go on the ground. In this metaphor, the balloon is the public's attention and the ground is the fundamentals, because the fundamentals right now are very bad for Democrats. And if nothing is there trying to keep the question focused elsewhere, gravity is going to pull things in Donald Trump's direction. So that's why Kamala Harris really wants to make sure that we're not talking about the fundamentals, things like I'm pissed off about the direction the country's going, dislike Joe Biden, I'm really mad about inflation, mad about immigration. She wants to be talking, and she will keep that balloon up in the air, about democracy, about abortion, and about how Donald Trump is dangerously unhinged and fit for office. That's what they want to keep it focused on. They're doing, I think, as good a job as they possibly can for this. Gallup just came out with all of their metrics that they pay attention to heading into an election, and almost every single one was in the direction of Republicans will probably win, and yet the national polling shows that it's a very competitive race, because I think she's doing a pretty good job of playing keep it up. And so when we're doing polling, that's the answer. We are trying to figure out what is the question that we want voters thinking about, less about like how do we frame our perfect policy, because voters just don't have the bandwidth to focus on that.
I appreciate Kevin implying that I let West Wing do my teaching for me without explicitly saying that. That was very deftly done there. I actually had a question, and this is related to something you were just talking about, but basically about voter knowledge. Now, I know a lot of what you're asking about is voter attitudes, feelings. I'm thinking about this a lot because obviously one of the things on Colorado's ballot this year is a ranked choice voting measure. One of the concerns raised about ranked choice voting is that it asks a lot of voters. It asks them to learn more about candidates and more about policies and be able to rank more people. And I'm wondering, just what are your impressions about like what voters actually know? That do they seem relatively aware of what's going on, of who's representing them? Are they largely just grasping in the dark here?
So I will say that Colorado voters, for the most part, tend to be fairly knowledgeable and educated compared to other voters across other parts of the country. That being said, we have to keep in mind, we have to level our expectations. Voters are going about their day-to-day lives doing regular things. They're not policy wonks like us. They're not in the business. So their knowledge is very low. And most of the time when they get to their ballot, it's the first time they're hearing about some of the measures. They're hopefully, we hope, going through the Blue Book and looking things up, or they're Googling, quite honestly. And, I don't blame them for that. They're going about their daily lives. They're regular people. But in Colorado, we do have, as Kevin mentioned, a very highly educated electorate. So they do tend to be very knowledgeable about what's going on. In terms of naming specific, members of the state legislature or who represents them, no, they're not going to be able to really come up with that off the top of their heads. But again, they're busy, they're living their lives. And, I don't really blame them for that.
I get something, maybe just another Colorado Sun transparency thing, and I'm curious what you guys think of this. But when we write about polling, we have, maybe to the chagrin of one political operative in this room, I try not to use polling that's more than a few weeks old. Try and look at those other things. How I guess we can go back to the issues one, because I had a question about that too. Like, just anecdotally, like when you look at something like this, how much can it change over 2 or 3 months? Is it pretty wild?
I don't think it's going to change that much.
Okay,
this has been fairly consistent all year. I don't see it changing.
Okay. And I guess a secondary question that stands out to me, right? And I was actually showing this to an editor who was saying, I think that some of the ballot measures this year might really drive turnout. But I noticed that when I look at this, abortion's not on there, schools and education are, crime and public safety are, but I'm looking specifically at abortion because that's the one that Democrats talk about as an issue that's turnout. So I wonder how much difference there is between asking somebody, what their top issue is and whether or not they're voting on what they say their top issue is.
Yeah, I mean, it does matter, right? So the way that we asked this question was an open end, right? It's like, what is the most important thing for the Colorado state government to address? And Democrats might not mention abortion because they're like, just leave it the hell alone. Like, leave my rights alone, right? I'd rather have you focus on fixing my schools rather than trying to like fix my body. And when you ask people about the issues that they're going to vote on, or like when you're considering a candidate, how much does their position on this issue matter? You'll get very different things, right? And this is, I think, part of the perennial frustration with voters is they feel like politics is focused on one thing, but with the things that they actually want fixed are kind of like over here and not necessarily aligned with what they actually care about. But yeah, if you ask a question like this one, they're going to answer exactly the question that you asked. What do you want your state government to address? But if you ask them what is important when you are deciding between voting for Jesse or voting for Seth, you might get something different because it's like, I don't want them to focus on abortion, but their position on abortion matters a great deal to me.
Yeah. So we've got like a couple minutes left. I'm going to ask you a very important question. How would you grade the polling aptitude of Joey Lucas in the West Wing?
She was brilliant.
Cool. Anything else you guys want to add just in the final minutes we have here?
Just a final plug, go to the CPI website, sign up. You'll get these polls directly into your inbox. You can look at everything we asked, exactly how we asked, in the order that we asked it. You can go through and do your own analysis on the crosstabs if you're a crazy person, or you can look at our analyses because we post analyses like the one that you saw here today. Yeah, we hope you guys continue to follow along on CPI polling. It's a public service that CPI is trying to provide so that we can fill the hole that has been left, unfortunately, by media organizations not being able to afford polling anymore.
Well, thank you guys so much. Appreciate it. And
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you everyone for coming.
Thank you.